Welcome, everyone, to another exciting wrestling historian edition only of HIAC Talk Radio. Please like, share, subscribe. The show is at HIAC Talk Radio on Twitter, all social media platforms. Our home, VOC Nation. Looking like September is going to be our relaunch for our website. We will talk about that at a later date. So that will be back soon. But right now, our home away from home, the VOC Nation Radio Network. Type in VOC Nation Radio on iTunes for the podcast. Go to youtube.com/danlaw83 for the video podcast, which is you're hopefully listening to or watching right now. I am your host, Dan Colachico. With me, as always, Craig Lagans. Craig, how are you this evening, afternoon today?
Well, depending on when you listen to this, Dan, my morning, afternoon, and evening are great. I'm here with my baseball tag team partner, Amber, and we are ready to start the show. Since we missed Wrestling Historian last week, this is an extra special, spectacular edition of Wrestling Historian. I'll take you back through the month of July and some of the great milestones that occurred in pro wrestling history.
Why don't you know what? Let's cut all the BS. Why don't you do that right now, sir?
Okay, well, there is no better time to start than at the beginning. 35 years ago, Dan, on July 14th, 1984, the state of Georgia, in longtime Georgia Championship Wrestling fans, wrestling fans were greeted to a very unusual sight because on July 25th, 1984, at 9:05 a.m., wanting to look at championship wrestling from Georgia, Georgia Championship Wrestling, rather, Freddie Miller, the host, instead of turning it over to the venerable host, the Walter Cronkite of wrestling, Gordon Solie, Freddie Miller introduces Vince McMahon.
Oh no!
Vince McMahon announced that they are now will be WWF. This will forever be known as Black Friday. Occurred July 14th, 1984. Behind the scenes, earlier that month, or had been in the works, Vince, who was just coming off of acquiring Hulk Hogan. Hulkamania was running wild.
Yeah, right.
And he noticed there was dissension in the Georgia Championship office. The owners of their time slot on TBS, Jack Barnett, the Briscoe brothers, Jack and Jerry, and Ole Anderson. But there were the four owners of Georgia Championship Wrestling, but they were on the outs with Ole Anderson. They weren't happy with his booking and the way he was pushing the show. And Vince saw opportunity, and he went to Jack and Jerry Briscoe and Jim Barnett, and since they were the majority owners, 3-1, they sold their share to Vince McMahon. And so July 14th, 1984, without any warning, Freddie Miller just said, "Here's Vince McMahon." And Vince went against his word, because instead of showing original program, which is what he promised them, there was nothing but old WWF clips from house shows in Madison Square Garden, Boston Garden, the Philadelphia Spectrum, old clips of previous WWF shows. So, of course, Georgia Championship Wrestling fans, NWA fans, were incensed because at this point, Georgia Championship Wrestling had been on for 12 years on TBS, and then made household names out of people like Gordon Solie, Tommy Rich, Mr. Wrestling 2, Terry Funk. They were used to their Georgia Championship Wrestling. Now it's been replaced by the wrestling they hate the most, WWF Wrestling. And there was no original programming. They were watching stuff they could have already watched on their WWF networks. And it wasn't until March 2nd of 1985, and WWF actually renamed it WWF Georgia Championship Wrestling. It wasn't until March 2nd, 1985, that they actually started using the studio to show in-studio matches. something they hadn't done before, something that Georgia Championship Wrestling fans had been used to, wrestling in the studio. So they didn't finally do it till March 2nd, 1985. They put on 2 matches and then an hour's worth of old stuff and interviews to promote WrestleMania, the first WrestleMania back then. So there was Freddie Miller and Gorilla Monsoon. Meanwhile, thousands and thousands of phone calls and letters were coming into the Georgia Championship Wrestling and the TBS studios, most of them asking for Gordon Soley. It was never explained what happened to Gordon Soley, whether he was fired or he quit outright. But that's where most of the complaints were coming from. The ratings were plummeted immediately, and Vince, seeing the handwriting on the wall, losing money and losing viewers, heading towards WrestleMania, the biggest show of the year, which he sank every dime into, and wasn't assured that he would get any of his money back. Took to Ted Turner and sold it back to, and went looking for help, and he went to Jim Crockett Jr. and he bought WCW from Vince McMahon for $1 million. And Georgia Championship Wrestling would return to TBS after that. You were gonna say something?
I was going to say, you touched upon it earlier, but I think that essentially that $1 million helped paid for WrestleMania. So not only did they promote WrestleMania on Turner Networks, not only did they upset almost everybody in the country, not only did they also, at the time, according to people that were watching, put a inferior product on the Saturday night spot, it basically paid for WrestleMania.
It did.
That's
paid for WrestleMania. And the domino effect after that, Dan, because not only did it do that, while Vince had control of the Georgia Championship Wrestling, Ted Turner gave 2 of his other spots on TBS to Bill Watts' Mid-South Wrestling, and Ole Anderson also ran Championship Wrestling from Georgia. WWF owned the Georgia Championship Wrestling, but Ole Anderson had Championship Wrestling from Georgia, which had Gordon Soley and had all the stars of Georgia Championship Wrestling. So Turner gave those national TV spots to Bill Watts for Mid-South and Ole Anderson for Georgia Championship Wrestling. Those 2 shows outdrew Vince's WWF Wrestling by miles. And because of that, thanks to those 2 time slots, wrestling organizations started to have national cable network outlets. Following that, the AWA was then seen on ESPN, followed by World Class, USWA, and the GWF was also shown on ESPN. That means that was the first time a national audience got to see such future stars as Steve Austin in World Class, Mick Foley, X-Pac, a young Scott Anthony, who would later go on to be Raven. But this was their first time on national TV because they were all on ESPN. And so had it not been for Ted Turner giving a national spotlight, national broadcast network to broadcast time to Bill Watts and to Ole Anderson, that opened the door for other wrestling organizations not named WWF to get a national cable network to put them on the air. So all that stemmed from July 14th, 1984. All that came from Black Saturday.
Wow.
Many years
that
ago.
is such a milestone that it's even covered in the WCW. It's either in the WCW DVD WWE put out or the Starrcade one.
Yeah.
Can't remember, but it's. Can I tell you something? Please. I either forgotten about it or had no idea about it until one of those, whatever DVD came out, whenever it came out. I had either erased it from my memory or I just had no idea it happened until then. It's all jumbled up there. I can't remember which one that is. But so when I watched it was one of those things where if I had forgotten, I was like, what? I had no idea.
Well, can I tell you something, Dan? I was 1984 was the greatest year in professional wrestling for me, and there was more wrestling on TV than ever before. But that day or that whole summer I missed. That was the summer before I went to college, so I was doing everything but. I was still in most of the wrestling I got then was from the After magazine 6 weeks later. So I missed all of Black Saturday, and by the time I got to college, when wrestling was on everywhere, I totally missed uh, the Vince McMahon takeover. I missed Black Saturday altogether. I missed that whole period.
Lucky you.
Yeah. So even though I was right there and I lived out, and it didn't help that I didn't have cable. And when I went to college, all the TVs and all the dorms and all the houses and all the frat houses, they all had cable. Of course, I didn't have it in my room, but there were so many syndicated wrestling shows back on and back in '84, so I got to see uh, not only Georgia Championship Wrestling, but World Class Championship Wrestling from Florida, WWF, Mid Atlantic Wrestling, Southwest Wrestling was on USA too. So back then, wrestling was king. Kids, back in 1984, you can watch 10 different wrestling shows in one day in 10 different wrestling territories, and it was phenomenal. It was actually absolutely heaven back in 1984. But I missed Black Saturday altogether. But that was one of the most important dates in professional wrestling history. July 14th, 1984, 35 years ago. And it started a chain reaction that we're still seeing to this day, but it all started back then. Back to our regularly scheduled historian. July 18th, we're going to bookend some dates here. 1980, July 18, 1980, Vern Gagne, probably in his 50s. I forgot his age, but 1980, Vern Gagne won his 10th AWA Heavyweight Championship, and it would be his final AWA Championship. He would retire as champion 3 months later, but July 18th, 1980 would be his 10th AWA Heavyweight title. That same date, 1989, July 8th, Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson would defeat Demolition for the WWF Tag Team Championship, becoming the first team ever in wrestling history to hold the NWA Tag Team Championship and the WWF Tag Team Championship. The Road Warriors would go on to hold all three recognized world championships, but Tully and Arn were the first team ever to be NWA Tag Team Champions, and when they defeated Demolition on this date, they would be the WWF Tag Team Champions. Amazing. 1 year later, July 18th, 1990, Ric Flair defeated Barry Windham for his 10th and final NWA Heavyweight Championship. The big gold belt would later be called the WCW International title, and the NWA title, the NWA moniker, name of the title will be dropped. But Ric Flair would defeat Barry Windham for his 10th and final NWA championship. Every world championship he would hold after that would be a WCW or a WWF heavyweight title. That was on that same card that Flair defeated Windham. Was the tag team title, I mean, not tag team title, the main event tag team match between Sting and Davey Boy Smith versus Sid and Vader. This main event match was set up by a brilliant vignette that had Sting on a boat that was blown up by a little person sent there by Sid and Vader. And a shot of Davey Boy Smith running across the beach in fast motion Baywatch form to try and save Sting. But alas, it was too late. The boat blew up, but Sting was miraculously unhurt. But that was the vignette leading up to this tag team main event between Sting, Davey Boy Smith, and Sid and Vader. The only reason I brought that up because of the horrible vignette leading up to it. You as a WCW fan, I know you
just all I could see is the little guy in the snorkel, and Apparently, the bulldog knows how to dive properly. It's just,
Yes. And, yeah, and trying to get Amber to sit still for that, she can't even do it. Lastly, on July 18th, 2010, was the first ever Money in the Bank pay-per-view. Some of the people involved in the first ever Money in the Bank, the Big Show, Matt Hardy, Kane, Christian, and from the current roster, Kofi Kingston, Dolph Ziggler, Cody Rhodes, and Drew McIntyre. They were all involved in the very first Money in the Bank match. Match won by Kane, by the way. Kane, footnote, ladies and gentlemen, the very first winner of the Money in the Bank match. But interesting that Kofi, Dolph, Cody, and Drew all are currently wrestling, all on the current WWE roster. Cody, of course, in AEW, but all still around. But that was 9 years ago. July 19th, 2009, TNA Victory Road. Good match between Sting and Samoa Joe, but what made this match famous, or made it memorable to me, was the TNA debut of Taz.
oh,
And I've always been a big fan of managers and people that don't have necessarily strong mic skills and having someone to talk. The reason I included this in a wrestling historian because I was so excited about the debut of Taz, but I never thought a manager or a figure worked better with another person than Taz with Samoa Joe. I always said that they didn't go further, but I always thought a Taz Samoa Joe manager wrestler combination or some type of spokesperson, advocate, whatever. I thought they just went together perfectly. But that was the July 19th, 2009 was the TNA debut of Taz. So as we said hello to Taz in 2009, July 19th, 2014, we said goodbye to Kevin Steen. That would be his last and final match in the Ring of Honor against Steve Corino. Right here in Philly, he got a big send-off. Locker room came out and pat on the back. He shook hands with everyone at ringside. But July 19th, 2014, 5 years ago, only 5 years ago, was the last Ring of Honor match ever in the career of Kevin Steen, who we all know now as Kevin Owens.
who,
Yes.
I might add, is stealing the show weekly the last few weeks, if not the last month and a half. Absolutely, hands down.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And if you look at Kevin Steen 5 years ago and Kevin Owens now, it's only been 5 years, completely different person. But you could see, and looking at Kevin Steen 5 years ago, I remember saying goodbye to him at Ring of Honor. And I think, well, his options are so limited because I don't ever see the WWE hiring such a heavy man, no matter how good a worker he is. He does not have the body. He doesn't have a WWE body. If he was ever go to the WWE, it would have been 20 years ago when he could have been a comedy act because they would have put him in some stupid outfit. But I never thought he would ever be in WWE, and B, that he's thrived the way that he has. And with the way he's going now, I really wouldn't. It would surprise me. I was actually with the way it's going now, because he definitely deserves being in the main event picture and definitely deserves a title shot of some sort. Again, because he is a guy that can carry a company. He's shown he can carry a company, and doing, like, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Dan. He's doing an incredible job week in and week out on SmackDown as a face. Kevin Owens is a natural heel, but he's pulling it off. But his last match.
I was going to say, I think the reason why it works is because they're doing a very similar thing they did to Steve Austin years ago, where he's still acting the same way, but because it's against an authority figure that both work and to shoot nobody wants on TV. He can still act like an a-hole,
Yeah.
and he's gonna get over as a face no matter what he does. Anybody in the McMahon family can get stomped to death on
Yeah.
TV. I mean,
Right.
I'm keeping it kayfabe, folks. And you could be the biggest prick on the television show, and you're gonna get a face pop. That's it. And remember in the days, you might have even said this. I don't know, but we no longer have Linda McMahon selling the worst stunner of all time. It's now Shane.
Yeah.
And
Shane, yeah, how sweet it. And Shane used to have take the best stunners, and Austin has said that on numerous occasions that Shane took the best. Shane took it better than anybody. But guess he only takes it best from Steve Austin. Kevin Owens is a different stunner altogether. Apparently. July 20th. You remember at the beginning of the top of the story, and Dan, I said Vern Gagne won his 10th AWA title in 1980. Well, July 20th, 1963, Vern Gagne won his 4th AWA title. So exactly 17 years earlier, Vern Gagne defeated the Crusher for the AWA championship. That would be his 4th title. And 17 years later, he would win his 10th. Isn't it great to own the company?
Yeah.
You can keep putting the belt on yourself. And then when a guy comes around that can actually improve your company and make it more successful than it's ever been, and he just was in the #1 movie in the country and probably the most popular wrestler of all time, instead of putting the belt on him, you'd rather not and have him go to the WWF and win the world belt there and call it Hulkamania and WrestleMania, and then 2 years later you're out of business.
Just think about that for a second.
Yes.
And of course, it's been talked about at great length, the downfall of the AWA. And, people always talk about the WWE putting their spin on things as far as DVDs they put out and network specials. If Vern pulled his head out of his butt for 5 seconds and would have done a third of what Vince did with Hulkamania, completely different story.
Just put the belt on him once.
Maybe it ends similarly, but it doesn't end the way it completely changes the track of everything, because that would trickle down to South, the NWA. It would trickle back up north to New York and WWF. That is a path that changes almost completely for everybody.
Oh yeah, most definitely. That's my favorite what if in all of professional wrestling. What if Hogan had been, and remember, Hulk Hogan was in the AWA 2 years before he came to the WWF. This is right at Rocky 3 came out in 1982 when Hogan was in the AWA. Sorry, 83. So again, a year. He was in the AWA for an entire year.
And that was after Vince Sr. let him go because he wanted to be in the movie.
Yes.
I mean, path.
Path. And he was on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson while he was in the AWA. Okay? Wrestlers don't go on the Tonight Show at all.
Nope.
No, but okay. But that was Vern. July 20th, 1973, 10 years later, Jack Briscoe wins his. I remember we talked about in past shows on this podcast about great champions and being defined by one reign. Jack Briscoe won his first and only NWA championship, July 20th, 1973, by defeating Harley Race.
God, wow.
Yeah, 1973. Jack Briscoe, forever known as a former NWA champion. Jack Briscoe would have an incredible career going forward. He held it for 2 years before losing it to Terry Funk, another one-time NWA champion. But Jack Briscoe would totally cement his career from the one world championship he won from Harley Race, July 20th, 1973. And Harley Race, who would go on to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest NWA champion of all time, never defeated Jack Briscoe. But Jack Briscoe has only been champion once. And this is a special date, July 20th, 2003. I just included this in the historian just to show that it started a long time ago. The one of the things I hate the most. July 20th, 2003, in a house show in Santa Monica, California, in their first meeting, Triple H pinned Goldberg. In a subtle hint of what was to come, of Triple H's utter disdain or his impeccable passion of defeating every WCW wrestler, former world champion, his quest, his zeal to keep the WWF over WCW in every way, shape, or form. In their first meeting, Triple H pins Goldberg. There was interference from Ric Flair, but in the end, Triple H gets his way.
I have no comment on the matter.
I didn't think so. I included that in the story and just to show that it started a while back. It didn't just with Sting and obviously we know Booker T, but the history of Triple H pinning former WCW champions in their first meetings started here. Even the first meeting of Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and Dean Malenko premiered on WW. All three of them lost. Triple H pins Chris Benoit, who was still WCW heavyweight champion at the time, but started here. Started then. I'm sorry, July 20th, 2003. Now, July 22nd was a very special day, Dan, in pro wrestling history because it gave us a lot of beginnings. July 22nd, the fabulous Moolah would have been 96 years old. Also, that same day, Hiro Matsuda, the trainer of Hulk Hogan and the breaker of his leg and the trainer of many great wrestlers, namely Lex Luger, Strong Kobayashi, Les Thornton, Nelson Royale, so many great wrestlers trained by Hiro Matsuda. He would have been 82 on July 22nd. David Von Erich would have been 61.
Oh, wow.
Only 61 on July 22nd. Shawn Michaels turned 54 on July 22nd, who still takes a hell of a super kick, as we see from Dolph Ziggler.
Yeah.
And number one on Jim Cornette's most hated list, former Tough Enough star Kenny King turned 38 on July 22nd. So all those people had birthdays on July 22nd. So it was a very special day. Also, that same day, July 22nd, 2001, was the Invasion pay-per-view. And this would be the highest pay-per-view the WWF had since WrestleMania. And the participants involved on the WCW, ECW team, Booker T, DDP, Rhino, and the Dudleys will go up against Steve Austin, Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho, The Undertaker, and Kane. And Austin would turn on his partners, and they would go down the road of one of the worst decisions they ever made was to turn Austin heel. But the Invasion pay-per-view took place July 22nd, 2001. I mentioned July 14th, 1984 was a important date in professional wrestling, Black Saturday. I think another important date that gets overlooked or gets looked past took place July 23rd, 1984. Also, again, 1984 goes back to my favorite year in professional wrestling because so many great things happened. Well, on July 23rd, 1984 was the brawl to end it all. For the first time ever, Wendy Richter took on the Fabulous Moolah for the Women's Heavyweight Championship. And this main event was broadcast live on MTV, okay? And it drew a 9 rating on MTV, okay?
Christ.
Yes. But this was, and Wendy Richter won the Women's World Championship, beating Fabulous Moolah. Now, I told you Moolah would have been 96 if she was still alive on July 22nd, that meant she was 62 when she lost to Wendy Richter. I'm sorry, 61. Yeah. When she lost to Wendy Richter.
Wow.
And
I got nothing. That's
yeah.
insane. That's if you've ever needed we all know the stuff that have come to light in recent years about Moolah.
Mm-hmm.
If you look back, you can find newspaper clippings of when her daughter filed a lawsuit against her for making her wrestle from like 16 to 19 years of age and never paying her.
Wow. Yeah.
But if we want to talk about career longevity and continuously inventing and reinventing yourself and keeping yourself in the game without really changing a thing, fabulous Moolah. Oh my God.
Yeah. And 1980, and she's 61 in 1984 and could still go and gave an amazing match. But Wendy Richter would win the women's championship, ending the reign of Fabulous Moolah, which started in 1956, mind you, with that championship. Again, it was broadcast live on MTV, and that started the Rock and Wrestling connection, because in Wendy Richter's corner was Cyndi Lauper, who was the biggest female artist in the world at the time. And on MTV, this is before Madonna, Cyndi Lauper was it. Wendy Richter came to the ring to Girls Just Want to Have Fun, and that's what started the Rock and Wrestling connection. Not Hulk Hogan, not Roddy Piper. Wendy Richter defeating the Fabulous Moolah live on MTV kickstarted everything. And interesting enough, that card, Dan, that was sold out. There was 25,000 people in Madison Square Garden that night on July 23rd, 1984. Adrian Adonis and Dick Murdoch were the WWF Tag Team Champions. They took on Sergeant Slaughter and Terry Daniels. And Hulk Hogan defeated Greg Valentine to defend his championship. And the winner of a 20-man battle royal that night, Antonio Inoki.
Wow.
Yes. Only the second battle royal ever in the history of Madison Square Garden, but of all people, Antonio Inoki, right in the middle of Hulkamania, won a 20-man battle royal on the same card that Wendy Richter defeated the Fabulous Moolah. But that started the Rock and Wrestling connection 35 years ago. July 23rd, 1989, the Great American Bash pay-per-view. That was probably my favorite WCW pay-per-view of all time, because it had some of my favorite matches and some of the most interesting things that happened. The Skyscrapers took on the Dynamic Dudes. That was the first time we got to hear a face pop from Sid. And the Dynamic Dudes, of course, Johnny Ace and Shane Douglas, ran to the ring in their Dayglow shorts and their jackets with skateboards in their hand. They were chastising critics, saying, why don't you just ride the skateboards all the way down? They had a ramp just made for it. Turns out Johnny Ace never rode a skateboard in his life and was afraid to hurt himself. So
why shocked about that?
Yeah, so it made just as much sense to run down to the ring holding skateboards in your hand. Also, Jim Cornette took on Paul Lee dangerously in a tuxedo match. Now, the night before, right here in Philadelphia, the Midnight Express took on the Freebirds, Terry Gordy and it was Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin and Terry Gordy in the outside. And after the match, Gordy threw a chair, or it was a fracas, and Jim Cornette, jumping off the ring apron, blew out his knee completely. So in the match against Paul Lee, thankfully they were wearing tuxedos, and Jim's knee was bandaged to the hilt like a tiny mummy. And your add-on, go ahead.
No, I was going to finish, and I'll add when I add on. I will add on after you're done.
Okay. Well, and Jim Cornette talks about this match a lot. I never get tired of hearing it just because it's a great story.
Yeah.
He's coming in limping, and Paul Lee talks about Jim's legitimate knee injury for when he fell off the scaffold the year before, and so he's going to target the knee. He's going to take out Paul Lee in a great promo with another great interviewer, Gordon Soley. You see, Jim Cornette, I know what happened to your knee. At the night of the skyscrapers, it fell out and your knee went completely out, okay? And people are telling me, Paul, to win the match this, to win the match that. Let me say once and for all, I don't care about winning this match. Jim Cornette, I'm obsessed with your demise. I'm going to take your knee out. O-U-T, out. And so Paul Lee went after Jim Cornette's knee. Problem is, Paul Lee went after the wrong knee. So while he's hitting Jim on the knee with his phone, Jim Cornette had to tell him mid-strikes, wrong knee, Paul, wrong knee. But they sold it. He stripped Paulie like a champ. Paulie took it like a champ, ran back to the ring, ran back to the dressing room in his underwear. Jim Cornette won the tuxedo match on one leg, defeating Paulie dangerously. That was also the first time Gordon Soley was backstage interviewing Sting. First time he had interviewed Sting. First time he'd yeah. And Sting versus the Great Muta for the NWA TV Championship. Great match. There was two rings set up, and so Muta was in one ring, and Sting wanted him to come in the other. Muta wouldn't leave, so Sting jumped from one ring to the other, dove across, and that started the match. Double pin. Muta got the shoulder up, left with the belt, and that would start off a war between those two for the NWA TV belt. And for my money, the greatest war games ever. No disrespect to Dusty and the Road Warriors and the Horsemen, but the Road Warriors and the Midnight Express and Dr. Death Steve Williams against the Freebirds and the Samoan SWAT team. That war games was the best war games ever. From the Hawk and Animal leaping from ring to ring against those two. From Bobby Eaton and Jim Garvin starting the match and never leaving each other. Those two kept on fighting each other throughout the whole war games. To Steve Dr. Death Williams pressing Terry Gordy above his head and Terry's back hitting the roof of the cage 17 times. He pressed Terry Gordy over his head and banged Gordy's back into the roof of the cage 17 times.
I legitimately just put it on.
Yes, and that is my favorite war games of all time. And the capper, the main event, Ric Flair's first match back after getting his neck broke by Terry Funk, and their match that they had, and Muta attacking Flair afterwards, and Sting saving Flair and turning Flair face.
It's funny. Right on the intro, they show shots of, and I'm serious. As we're doing this right now, I just put that bash on from the network, which I will be talking about in a second before the show is over. It's funny, years later, they show the opening shots of Baltimore, and they zoom into a shot of the Baltimore arena, and it's one of those arenas. As I was growing up, man, I need to go there someday. Some good stuff happened there, and then later on, that's where Sting wins his first title against Flair. Great American Bash is after that. It was a wrestling mecca for a WCW fan. One of.
Yeah.
And then you go there. It is a dump. It is not a good building. And it's real hard because if you go to any Stadium Journey episodes where the Baltimore Arena is tagged, we've talked about it before because that is part of that podcast, Stadium Journey, talk about venues and amenities of different stadiums and arenas around the world. But one of the things that you have that problem in Baltimore is you can't tear it down and rebuild. There's nowhere else to go.
No.
There's nowhere else to put on a show. There's nowhere to stick another one while you tear one down. And then if you're trying to tear that one down, you are stuck between a rock and a hard place there. So that's what you got. Now, for what it is and where it is, I saw the Smashing Pumpkins there last summer.
Okay.
It was a great concert. I will try to avoid that arena at all costs from now on, but it's so weird to see it now that you've been there and go, oh God, that's so uncomfortable. Oh God.
Yeah. But Baltimore Arena, love it or hate it, in 1989, was host to one of my favorite WCW pay-per-views of all time.
Cowboy Scott Hall, man.
Yeah.
Holy crap. It's been a while since I've seen this one.
Yeah. I think it was Brian Pillman versus Scott Irwin. Too,
Yeah.
was the opening match. Yeah, I loved everything. I watched it Sunday afternoon, back when pay-per-views came on in the afternoon. Was riveted, absolutely riveted. But they sold it. He stripped Paulie like a champ. Paulie took it like a champ, ran back to the ring, ran back to the dressing room in his underwear. Jim Cornette won the tuxedo match on one leg, defeating Paulie dangerously. That was also the first time Gordon Soley was backstage interviewing Sting. First time he ever interviewed Sting. First time he'd and Sting versus the Great Muta for the NWA TV Championship. Great match. There was two rings set up, and so Muta was in one ring, and Sting wanted him to come in the other. Muta wouldn't leave, so Sting jumped from one ring to the other, dove across, and that started the match. Double pin. Muta got the shoulder up, left with the belt, and that would start off a war between those two for the NWA TV belt. And for my money, the greatest war games ever. No disrespect to Dusty and the Road Warriors and the Horsemen, but the Road Warriors and the Midnight Express and Dr. Death Steve Williams against the Freebirds and the Samoan SWAT team. That War Games was the best War Games ever. From the Hawk and Animal leaping from ring to ring against those two. From Bobby Eaton and Jim Garvin starting the match and never leaving each other. Those two kept on fighting each other throughout the whole War Games. To Steve Dr. Death Williams pressing Terry Gordy above his head and Terry's back hitting the roof of the cage 17 times. He pressed Terry Gordy over his head and banged Gordy's back into the roof of the cage 17 times.
I legitimately just put it on.
Yes. And that is my favorite War Games of all time. And the capper, the main event, Ric Flair's first match back after getting his neck broke by Terry Funk. And their match that they had, and Muta attacking Flair afterwards, and Sting saving Flair and turning Flair face.
It's funny. Right on the intro, they show shots of, and I'm serious. As we're doing this right now, I just put that bash on from the network, which I will be talking about in a second before the show is over. It's funny, years later, they show the opening shots of Baltimore, and they zoom into a shot of the Baltimore arena, and it's one of those arenas. As I was growing up, man, I need to go there someday. Some good stuff happened there, and then later on, that's where Sting wins his first title against Flair. Great American Bash is after that. It was a wrestling mecca for a WCW fan. One of,
yeah.
And then you go there. It is a dump. It is not a good building. And it's real hard because if you go to any Stadium Journey episodes where the Baltimore Arena is tagged, we've talked about it before because that is part of that podcast, Stadium Journey, talk about venues and amenities of different stadiums and arenas around the world. But one of the things that you have that problem in Baltimore is you can't tear it down and rebuild. There's nowhere else to go.
No.
There's nowhere else to put on a show. There's nowhere to stick another one while you tear one down. And then if you're trying to tear that one down, you are stuck between a rock and a hard place there. So that's what you got. Now, for what it is and where it is, I saw the Smashing Pumpkins there last summer.
Okay.
It was a great concert. I will try to avoid that arena at all costs from now on, but it's so weird to see it now that you've been there and go, oh God, that's so uncomfortable. Oh God.
Yeah. But Baltimore Arena, love it or hate it, in 1989, was host to one of my favorite WCW pay-per-views of all time.
Cowboy Scott Hall, man.
Yeah.
Holy crap. It's been a while since I've seen this one.
Yeah. I think it was Brian Pillman versus Scott Irwin. Too,
Yeah.
was the opening match.
Yeah.
I loved everything. I watched it Sunday afternoon, back when pay-per-views came on in the afternoon.
Thank God.
Was riveted. Absolutely riveted. July 22nd, another major day in history. A lot of firsts. Sherry Martel pinned the Fabulous Moolah, go figure, for the women's championship, which would be her last champion. It would be Sherry Martel's first WWF championship, and she would become the first woman ever to hold the AWA women's title and the WWF women's title. But she defeated Fabulous Moolah at the age of 64, folks. Could still go, would lose to Sherry Martel. That same day, July 22nd, 1999, in Memphis, Kurt Angle would defeat J.R. Smooth, not to be confused with J.B. Smooth, but when Kurt Angle defeated J.R. Smooth, he won the Memphis Power Pro Heavyweight Championship. Not only would that be Kurt Angle's first ever championship in wrestling, but it was the first time an Olympic gold medalist ever won a professional wrestling title.
Wow.
But that was July 22nd, 1999. And in more recent history, July 22nd, 2013, Paige defeated Emma to become the first ever NXT Women's Champion. Moving on, July 25th, 1993, Dan. Well, we'll start off with a very important date in love, because in July 25th, 1993, was when a young Dustin Runnels married Terry Boatwright, and the union of Goldust and Marlena became official.
That did not end
No, and the same Terry that Dustin was crying over on the infamous flight on the PA system, begging for her back, and at one point singing.
Yeah, it's mostly his fault. Let me rephrase. It's all his fault. But I'll let you folks listening look that up.
Yeah, you had some real fun. But their union occurred July 25th, 1993. Miles to the north, though, while that happy union was coming, while that union was starting, a reunion happened on that same date, miles to the north, in Alexandria Bay, New York, of all places, a WWF TV taping. Vince and Bobby Heenan are getting ready to call a match where a guy comes through the crowd, and Bobby Heenan is overjoyed and leaps up to greet this man. And Vince McMahon in commentary, this is some reunion of sorts. I don't know who this gentleman is. And Bobby invites the gentleman into the ring, and he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, you don't talk. Let me talk for you. Ladies and gentlemen, humanoids of all ages, I want to introduce to you the greatest manager of all time, Jim Cornette."
Oh, wow.
Jim, always gracious, he said, "Bobby, if I'm the greatest manager of all time, it's only because you retired." So on July 25th, 1993, Jim Cornette, hell must have frozen over, because Jim Cornette made his WWF debut.
And people forget how long I forgot how long he was involved on camera. Like he was with that company. He was there until I mean, even technically when he was doing OVW, he was still employed.
Yes.
WWF. But his on-screen role, like Raw is airing in '96, where I am on the network, and he's still on air,
Oh
like
yeah.
a all blown off manager. And I forgot how late he was still doing that. It just didn't
Yeah.
occur to me. Like I known it did. I had to see it to like, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's he did that for Yokozuna and Vader and all that.
And Owen Hart and yeah.
Oh,
But this particular TV taping, he uh he sat in on a match between Mr. Perfect and Barry Hardy, and doing comment trading compliments with Bobby. And he looked to his left and he goes, I've been meaning to ask you this for a long time, McMahon. What's the deal with your hair? I didn't know Earl Shop did hair. And
oh man.
that was also the WWF debut of the Heavenly Bodies. Um, Jim was beginning of Smoky Mountain the start of Smoky Mountain Wrestling at the time, but that was July 25th, 1993, was the WWF debut of James E. Jim Cornette. July 26th, 1980. I knew exactly where I was, Dan. I was at the Spectrum, watching a WWF card at the time. I think Bob Backlund beat Greg Valentine. But what I remember most was on this particular day, July 26, 1980, was Hulk Hogan took on Andre the Giant. He lost by disqualification, but Hulk Hogan body slammed Andre the Giant in front of everyone at the Spectrum. And he did it again a month later in Shea Stadium, and he did it again. He had done it previously a month before at Madison Square Garden. So I saw Hulk Hogan body slam Andre the Giant in 1980. So when he did it in WrestleMania 3 in 1987, wasn't that impressed. I mean, I guess I would have been more impressed because Andre had gained about another 150 pounds since then. But watching him slam Andre back then, it was a big deal, but it wasn't that much of an effort. It was like, wow, Hogan slammed Andre. Everyone here at the Spectrum saw it. Everyone at Madison Square Garden saw it. Everyone was at Shea Stadium August 9, 1980, which will come up in a future wrestling historian. They saw it. But yeah, Hogan slammed Andre. Whoopee. Uh, July 26, 1986. Greensboro, Great American Bash. Dusty Rhodes would defeat Ric Flair to win his third and final World Heavyweight Championship in a cage in Greensboro. Dusty Rhodes would go over Ric Flair, and he would lose it a week later. But this would be his final World Championship. I just saw an interview with J.J. Dillon, who talked about his time there and how it seemed how Dusty would always go over the Horseman, or it seemed like it would always have the Horseman job to Dusty in some way, shape, or form. But that was one of the telltale signs. Again, like Vern Gagne, it must be nice to run the company. You get to be world champion when you want to.
who are you gonna try more than yourself?
Exactly. Hey, he worked for Jerry Lawler too, but what do I know? July 27th. Um, happy 39th birthday to Dolph Ziggler.
He's 39.
39 years old. 1980, July 27th, 1980 was the birth of Dolph
Ziggler on that television show, I tell you.
Yeah, that he is.
There's that weird small sect of people that are tired of looking at him. I'm like, I can't help you. I can't help you with that. I don't know why that's a thing. Yeah, whatever.
July 27th, 2002, right here in Philly at the Murphy Rec Center. in a 1 hour match that got a standing ovation. Low Key defeated Christopher Daniels, Doug Williams, and Spanky v. Brian Kendrick to become the very first Ring of Honor champion. But 17 years ago, July 27, 2002, we crowned our first ever Ring of Honor champion. July 28th, 1995 would be the third of the trilogy of some would say the greatest matches in ECW history. Eddie Guerrero would defeat Dean Malenko for the ECW TV Championship in Middletown, New York. Now, this was an outdoor show that they had in the rain. This is right after a tornado watch had gone through. But Eddie and Dean still managed to put on a clinic, and Eddie regained the ECW TV Championship. That same card would also be the ECW debut of Rick and Scott, the Steiner brothers.
Wow.
July 29th, a very important TV taping in 1985. July 29th, 1985, after Randy Savage squashes some jobber whose name I don't remember. Randy Savage at the time was billed as the hottest free agent in professional wrestling, when they still use that term. And his previous matches, around ringside, there would be Slick, Luscious Johnny V, Jimmy Hart, Freddie Blassie, and Bobby Heenan, who would scout Randy Savage. Well, after this particular match, they all joined him in the ring, all these great managers. Randy Savage cut a promo on each of them, telling them about their strengths and what he liked about each of them, before introducing his actual manager, his new manager. Making her debut July 29th, 1985, was the lovely Miss Elizabeth. Round of applause for the late, great Elizabeth Hewlett. But she made her TV debut July 29th, 1985.
It's anybody that got better looking as the years went on. It was Miss Elizabeth.
Oh, most definitely.
And I'm talking, I'm talking from a red-blooded male and just male or female. She de-aged every year.
And Dan, and not to end it on a sour note, even with the drug use, she still looked beautiful.
Thank you, Lex Luger, for killing.
Yes.
And no, you're a born again Christian. It's all fine, Larry.
Oh yeah, it's all fine now. Yeah, Larry Full. And again, to our fans, I know I stressed this earlier in the year, but please, if you can, check out Dark Side of the Ring, the documentary series, 6-part. The first episode, of course, was Randy Savage and Elizabeth. Just masterful storytelling. Professional wrestlers' lives are unlike any other in life, and their story was just great. And even if you're a fan of both of them, you think you know everything, just watch.
You've heard the news that not only they've been renewed, but they've been extended.
No, I did not hear the news. Thank you.
They're getting a season 2, and I think they're doubling the episodes to 12.
Oh, awesome. Absolutely awesome.
It's 6, right?
Yeah, it was 6. There were only 6.
Yeah, so they're going to do 12 for the next season.
Oh, fascinating. Oh, yeah. Man. Cannot wait to find out what they do next.
If you have not, I think my favorite episode, because we all knew about Bruiser Brody, and it wasn't really, other than Abdul.
What a prick Abdul the Butcher was. Yeah.
Other than what a denying, lying, conniving prick that Abby still is, on top of working all those years with hepatitis and not telling anybody, he's still a lying, full of crap. Other than that, we knew it's been pretty much ignored by Puerto Rico officials, but well known by everybody else what happened with Bruiser Brody.
Yeah.
The Gino Hernandez one.
Yes. Fascinating.
That is really the one. And again, mind you, the whole series is fantastic. Anybody who has not checked it out, it's on, oh my God, what network is it on? Vice. It's on Viceland, the network. You can find it on their website, all the episodes. I'm begging you, casual fans or hardcore fans of wrestling, watch that series. But the Gino Hernandez one has got to be my favorite because, and I think it's from perspective of a big wrestling fan like you and I, we know who Gino Hernandez is. And we know him very well, whether through archival footage or you who lived through the days of Gino. Is one of those guys that I wish casual wrestling fans knew about that exist. I'm going to make a comparison here. He is the Bill Hicks of wrestling.
Oh, yes.
He was probably the greatest, I said probably on purpose, the greatest wrestler of his time that was cut short due to death. I'm not talking about the circumstances of that death. Watch that episode. You'll find out more. Bill Hicks was probably, in my opinion, one of the greatest, if not the greatest comedians of his time, and his life was cut short and his messages stopped. Watching Gino work, comparing it to this day, is like watching a guy that time traveled.
Yeah.
Bill Hicks's comedy and political humor is 100% relevant as it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And if anybody's wondering, I just came up with that comparison. That was not written. That was improvised, and I stand by it. That's it.
Yeah, and it's spot on, Dan, honestly. I've said many times on this podcast, and I thank God for this podcast that I have this outlet to talk about, because before that, I said to anyone who would listen that how Gino Hernandez is what the example of what could have been and still remains to this day what Gino Hernandez could have been. The people that got to see him, anyone who got to see him, instantly you will remember him just because of his look, of his promos, of his work in the ring. Gino Hernandez would have been an amazing $1 million man. Gino Hernandez would have been a solid 4 horseman. Gino Hernandez would have been NWA champion or WCW champion. Is just he's my, out of all the, unfortunately, of the sport that we love the most, professional wrestling, is littered with wrestlers that have left us before their time. But out of all of them, Gino is the one that I believe would have been one of the good enough, taking nothing away from David Von Erich, taking nothing away from Jay Youngblood, taking nothing away from Eddie Guerrero, who achieved greatness but still had a lot more left in him. Gino Hernandez was always going to be my cautionary tale, or my what if, because, man, just like with Bill Hicks with comedy, as we're talking about great comedians now, Bill Hicks would have been there too, no doubt.
He'd still be involved today. He just,
yeah.
I can't oversell Gino Hernandez, and unfortunately, it was a guy that myself had to find out about later.
Yeah.
And that's what. I was just going to say, once I found out, it's one of those things where I'm a very obsessive guy. If I like something, I need to know and see all that I can see and know all that I can know about that subject. That's why it's never good to debate me about the band Genesis. You will be wrong every time, 100%. Period. But Gino's one of those guys. It was still early enough when I found out about him that YouTube, and even not YouTube, but Daily Motion stuff, you look him up and find his matches, find his promos. He's the man. He was the man.
He was the man. And had everything. Great looking, great body, could work, gets any style, and, typical great heel.
We'd be talking about the 5 matches Gino Hernandez and Ric Flair would have had.
Oh, my God.
We would be talking about right now. All right, good. I'm sorry. We have to have a Hernandez episode.
Yes. And he was another person that I thought I knew, and because you said I was living it. Gino Hernandez was in the middle of a huge feud, and with Chris Adams, and then next week, he's dead. What? And it just like with he's in the middle of an angle. He had blinded Chris Adams the week before, throwing something in his eyes, and Chris Adams was doing the thing. He's talking to the camera with his eyes bandaged with gauze all over them, swearing his revenge on Gino. Even if I have to go in there blind, I'm going to get you, Gino. And
Yep.
you're going to wait for Chris Adams to get his revenge on Gino. And next week, oh, Gino's dead. Okay.
I just wanted to tack on one last thing, and I only thought about it because I literally, after you mentioned it, watched the Sting and Muta match for that Great American Bash, and was reminded of the time that Gary Hart was Muta's manager.
Yes.
There's another guy that was hands-on with Gino and never got over that.
No.
To the day he died, he never got over that.
Yeah, and Gino was a guy that Gary saw as a son, and Gary Hart managed so many great wrestlers and advised so many great people and was in the ear with so many great wrestlers. But Gino, he really took it hard because he was that good and because he could have written his own ticket and because he could have gone anywhere. Obviously, with the expansion that was coming, he was not going to stay in world class because obviously world class was going away. He would have gone to WWF. He would have gone to WCW, both.
I'm just saying for the people who are watching the podcast, this is his championships and accolades in only 10 years.
And he started when he was 19.
Yeah.
And he was over when he was 19. Whether or not he was the actual son of Joe Blanchard, which is why he got a push, we'll never know. But whether
with Tully.
Yeah. And he and Tully were tag team partners in Southwest. They could have reunited in WCW, which I really thought would happen. Tully, nothing against Arn Anderson, but Gino and Tully would have been natural in the Horsemen. Gino was acting like a horseman before there was a horseman. Gino was acting like the $1 Million Man before there was a $1 Million Man. Like I said, he could have gone to WWF, WCW, could have done both like Rick Rude and thrived in both companies. Again, Gino Hernandez, the sky was the absolute limit for him. Staying on this somber note, staying on that same date, July 29th, because we were talking about Miss Elizabeth, but July 29th, 1999 was the Curtis Comes Home event here in Pennsylvania, in Rostraver, Pennsylvania, a benefit show for Mark Curtis, Brian Hildebrand, who was battling stomach cancer. But on that particular night, July 29th, WCW, WWF, ECW, Smoky Mountain all came together to raise $30,000 for Brian Hildebrand, for Mark Curtis. On that card, Dominic DeNucci, who trained Mark Curtis, Brian Hildebrand, Cactus Jack, Shane Douglas, went up against Lord Zoltan, Eddie Guerrero, took on Billy Kidman and Shark Boy in a triple threat match. D'Lo Brown took on Al Snow, and Mick Foley was a referee. And in a weird, Mick Foley ended up pinning D'Lo, even though he was a referee. Chris Jericho defeated Terry Taylor. And the final match was Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Shane Douglas against Tim Horner, Tracy Smothers, and Chris Candido, with Tammy Sitch in their corner. And the referee was knocked down, and Terry Taylor helped Mark Curtis over the railing, got in the ring, and Mark Curtis counted the pinfall to end the match and to end the night. We would lose Mark, unfortunately, 10 months later. But that was the Curtis Comes Home event was one of the last times that all three or four major wrestling companies, WCW, WWF, ECW, and Smoky Mountain, all lent their wrestlers for one match in the tiny town of Rostraver, Pennsylvania, to honor a man that everyone loved. Anyone who ever met loved. The Curtis Comes Home event. I don't believe it's on DVD.
I've never seen either.
I've only seen still footage, still photos, and there's pics of it. When I was doing research for this segment, there was pictures online of all the wrestlers um, posing backstage, and it's even sad still to look at the ones that aren't here anymore, not just Mark, but looking at Chris Candido and Eddie and Chris, but yeah, Curtis comes home July 29th. And today in pro wrestling history, 40 years ago today, speaking of, we talked about TV tapings earlier, people making their debuts. Jim Cornette made his debut this week on a WWF TV taping. Miss Elizabeth made her debut. Well, on this particular WWF TV taping in Allentown, Pennsylvania, today, 40 years ago, Tony Atlas made his WWF debut. And on that same TV taping, playing the bagpipes with the help of ring announcer Joe McHugh, will be Roddy Piper, who made his WWF debut today, July 31st, 1979, 40 years ago, before he returned, obviously in 1983, to begin his epic run as the most famous heel in professional wrestling history. But he made his first debut July 31st, today, 1979, in the WWF. A card that gets kind of overlooked in WWF history, but still was a big deal. July 31st, 1988, was the first, last, and only WWF WrestleFest. Took place in Milwaukee County Stadium. 25,866 people, which is more than what the Milwaukee Brewers were drawing at the time. But it was the first and only match between Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant that took place in a cage.
Oh, wow.
This is also Ultimate Warrior defeated Bobby the Brain Heenan, and they put him in a weasel suit. This was the first time that happened. But July 31st, 1988, this was kind of Hogan's debut, his first time he'd been back in the WWF in quite some time. He was tanner and a lot thinner, but that was the first time Hogan wrestled Andre in a cage. And Hogan didn't slam Andre in that match in 1988, but it's okay because I already saw Hogan slam Andre back in 1980, 8 years prior.
Dang, what you trying to say?
I'm trying to say that it's been there, done that, moved on. And 3 years ago today, Dan, speaking of loss, and I mentioned Roddy Piper made his debut in WWF in 1979. Well, today, 3 years ago, Roddy Piper left us at the age of 61.
Yes.
Yeah, the same age David Von Erich would have been. And at 61, Fabulous Moolah was still wrestling. But Roddy Piper left us at the cardiac arrest, passed away on this date 3 years ago, 2016, at the age of 61. Maybe, arguably, the greatest heel of all time.
That arguably is, period. End of
the greatest heel of all time.
It's Roddy Piper and everybody else. There's a few real close seconds, and everybody else.
Definitely the most famous heel, yes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And one of the best movies ever put out.
And he is the first. Yeah, you're talking about Hell Comes to Frogtown.
Frogtown, exactly. Damn it, you stole my joke. Kiss my ass, Craig.
Yes. But I was going to say, in a legit movie note, though, Roddy Piper is the first wrestler ever to star in a #1 movie.
Not Hulk Hogan.
Yeah. Not The Rock.
Not The Rock. That's right. Yeah. Who?
Exactly. The first.
I don't even look at like The Rock is an actor who was a wrestler, not the other way around. Yeah. I don't mean that in an insulting way. He was amazing in WWE, but he's been an actor for so long that in my mind, I don't think of him. I don't put him on the list with Hogan and Piper. It's The Rock. No. Rock is on a world of his own.
Yeah, but and people say, oh, well, Hogan was in Rocky 3. That was #1 movie, but Hogan wasn't the star of that movie. The first wrestler to star in a #1 movie was Roddy Piper. They Live was the #1 movie when it opened at the box office. Okay.
That movie is actually very good.
Oh, it is, and
It's
it's a great social commentary too.
Yeah, talk about relevancy and holding up 30 years later. They
Yeah.
live.
Hmm. Resist.
Resist, obey, reproduce, consume.
Hmm.
But my favorite part about that is at the end when they're on the alien home base and they're
Hmm.
hiding and trying to get up to the roof to
Yeah.
blow up the satellite to break the spell and get everybody to see what's going on. The aliens are commuting back and forth to each other. And what they're doing is using a PKE meter from Ghostbusters.
Wow.
Not modified at all. There's no changes to it. They literally turn it on. The wings go up, the lights flicker, and they talk into it like this, like a communicator. And when they're done talking, the wings go down, they turn it off. It is literally a PKU meter held up to your mouth. That's
Wow.
one of my favorite reused props of any movie of all time. It's just I always and like there'll be like 2 years will go by and I won't watch it and I'll put it back on and I'll forget it's coming. I'm like PKE meter. Thank you, John Carpenter. I appreciate that.
Thank you, John Carpenter. Yes, but I knew if anything Ghostbusters in any other movie, you would find it.
Yeah, of course.
And that, my friend, is what you call a wrestling historian.
The only thing I wanted to rant about this week, as far as modern wrestling, is the WWE Network. I'm not going to put a full FU to the network as of now, but I am going to say that I'm watching you, WWE Network. I'm going to cut a promo on you right now, Network. I'm going to cut a promo right now, WWE. They switched to I don't know how to pronounce this name, but it's New Leon, which is a streaming service from Endeavor streaming service. Am I keeping you up, Craig? Okay.
No, I caught it from Amber. Sorry.
God
She's
damn
riveted.
it. Yeah, she's riveted by my ranting. The ECHL, the AHL, and the NHL at one point used a streaming service, and it never really worked. It's a bad streaming service. From my experience, I'll have to say it like that. I put a little disclaimer on there. I don't want to get sued for slander. In my experience, every time I used the services, never worked. It buffered, it skipped, it jumped, never got a stream, whether it was hardwired or wireless. It never worked. Now, late last year, it was announced that the network was switching to that, and I cannot find out if the WWE Network has switched to that streaming service as of this date. However, they did a lovely update aesthetically to the WWE Network. Looks great. Stream don't work anymore. It doesn't. The first live show I watched was WWE Smackville, and it would keep it wasn't even every minute. Every 30 seconds, it would skip back a second and then go forward. It keep going. Every live broadcast or regular, the only thing that works is the vault.
Okay.
I just streamed Great American Bash, skip through it, no problem.
Yeah.
Anything you try to stream that's live, and I'm hardwired, it does not work now. So I don't know. I'm kind of weary because it is coming out soon that they are going to come up with tiers.
Okay.
So there's going to be a free subscription and a paid subscription, and I believe the paid subscription is going up like $5.
Wow.
I think it's $14.99. And as long as I can still watch my stuff without any buffering, I'm willing to pay that much. I've said on this show I'll pay $19.99 for the stuff that's on there.
Okay.
It's worth every penny. But if we're going to get this quality streaming and you're still going to charge me more money, I won't be using it much longer.
Wow.
It's like we went back to 2014 when the network launched and everything streams like it's running through mud.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to get real impatient with that. I'm going to be patient. I'm going to give it a month or two while they air out the bugs. But I do encourage anybody who is experiencing the issues to let them know about it, because if you just sit back and let it happen, what's the point?
Yeah.
I'm
Now,
not
are you still gonna get SummerSlam?
well, get it. It's there.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I have
There-
to say that, because if I say I'm going to watch it illegally and still do the show, it's going to be a problem. Yes.
Okay.
No, I'm going to keep it through August to see. I'm good until August 26th. That's when
Okay.
my subscription is up, or my month is up. So we'll see after that.
Gotcha.
But I was highly annoyed. You guys took a step back, and I know it has to do with money and production costs and all that kind of thing, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it, guys.
Mhm.
They've done a lot since that first year where it barely streamed to where we are now. So
Yeah.
hopefully it's just me being picky. I'm okay with me being picky, and that being the problem. You know what I'm saying?
I don't know.
You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Craig, it's been a fun episode. I think we're gonna just end it there.
Okay, we'll do that.
Hey, why would we do that? Craig, where can people follow you and your adventures online?
If they so choose, Dan, they can follow me on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter at Craig Ligon, CraigLiGeons. If you like that comic book stuff, you can follow me over at Comic Book Gurus on WMMR.com or our Facebook page, Comic Book Gurus Podcast.
Follow me on Twitter at DanLaw83. The HIAC Talk Radio Network is on all social media platforms at HIAC Talk Radio. Search us out. Like I said, our temporary home away from home is the VOC Nation Radio, so search out VOC Nation Radio. For the video editions of the podcast, go to YouTube. Got it? YouTube.com/DanLaw83 for the video podcast. And like, share, subscribe. Tell everybody about it. There, Dustin, that was for you. For Craig Ligon, so tell your friends that are wrestling fans to listen and watch the damn podcast. I'm strictly on a share for share basis on social media now. All these years, I retweet, I share everything from everybody else that I like, and nobody does it back. If you're not sharing my stuff, I ain't sharing yours. I'm a bitter. I'm going to be 36 in 16 days. I'm going to be bitter about it from now on. For Craig Ligons, I'm the very happy Dan Calachico. We'll see you next week. And Amber says good night. Amber hasn't been awake in like an hour. See you next week, everybody.